SCHD recently went through its annual reconstitution, and oh boy was it a doozy. Us SCHD holders welcomed 23 new companies to the ETF. And we also received our first quarter dividend payment as well. There was a lot going on with SCHD this month, and in this video, we're going to dive into all the nerdy details, including how that dividend payment stacked up against the competition. And you may be wondering if we should still be buying SCHD at this point. And to that, I would recommend that you
Get it, girl. Get it, girl.
If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name's Teeples, and here we aim to grow your wealth by exclusively talking about SCHD in every video. I'm kidding, I promise there's going to be more variety coming. Before we dive in, please drop it to the floor and make that like button shake. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop me a comment with your favorite dividend ETF or dividend stocks. We have 13 new channel members for the Sunday Shoutouts this week. That is incredible. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Christy, Harshad, Vikash, Camper, Christian, Paul C, Mike, Craig and Mandy, Paul S, Gregory, Barath, Reggie, and Nick. Thank you so much for the support, you guys, and let's grow. SCHD Basics. While I joked about making nothing but SCHD videos in the intro, there has been a good reason for that lately. With the bull market lately with growth ETFs like VGT and QQQM, we really have heard nothing but negative sentiment about the SCHDs of the world over the last year or so. And now look, VGT is my favorite ETF. I'm a long-term tech bull and I've said it many times. But it is important to maintain a balance within our portfolios. There's always going to be what is known as the reversion to the mean. Right now, growth ETFs are just shooting up to the moon, while SCHD has stayed pretty flat and stagnant lately. Eventually, the growth ETFs will crash, and tech will take at least a temporary, maybe a huge hit, and then all of a sudden SCHD will be shining. And when that time comes, you know that all the YouTubers are going to be saying, I told you so, cash is king, you gotta go with SCHD, and the VGT, XLKs, you know, the NASDAQ 100, SCHG, all those types of ETFs, they're trash. I knew it all along. But I'll be making videos about the golden opportunity to pick up the trash at a discount. Warren Buffett explained this better than I ever could. Be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful. And it is that simple, but oftentimes our human emotions will blind us in the moment. All right, let's move on. We're gonna touch on the basics of SCHD just in case you're new to the channel. I'll be very brief this time. I pulled up SCHD out here on Seeking Alpha, which has long been my favorite site for researching stocks and ETFs. And a quick note before we dive in, Seeking Alpha is having a special discount on its premium membership right now. I do have a link in the description below if you're interested in trying it for free and getting an additional discount compared to usual if you like what you see. So SCHD is the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF. We're just gonna quickly touch a few things here. Its expense ratio is a razor thin 0.06% or 6 basis points, so we keep that money in your pockets. And its assets under management is a beefy 55 billion. So this fund is not going anywhere. And the holdings breakdown for SCHD is very balanced compared to many of its dividend ETF peers, which are still usually heavy in technology. And this is where SCHD gives you that nice counterbalance to a lot of the growth ETFs. But if you look at it, it's 17% financials, 15% healthcare, and then you have about 14% of consumer defensive and industrials, and then 13% energy and 11% consumer cyclical, and only 9% technology. That's nearly unheard of these days. And the top 10 holdings are very well known in the dividend world. You have Texas Instruments, UPS, Cisco Systems, Home Depot, Lockheed Martin, Pepsi, Bristol Myers, that's a new addition, BlackRock, Chevron, and Pfizer. And those top 10 holdings make up about 39% of the ETF, so it's not overly concentrated like some. And it is made up of 100 companies, 23 of which are new after the reconstitution. And you can see here there's 104 holdings, some have multiple share classes. And SCHD is rebalanced quarterly to keep the top holdings at 4% or less. They'll run up a little, but it doesn't let any one individual holding run away like some other ETFs do. This is a quick snapshot I found in a Seeking linking alpha article of the methodology of SCHD, and we're not going to read this whole thing, but the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index is what SCHD seeks to track. And I'll just highlight some things here. It excludes REITs, so it's all qualified dividends. It first screens for companies with at least 10 consecutive years of dividend payments, not necessarily dividend growth, but 10 years of paying them in a row. This eliminates about 90% of the US companies. And then it has some minimum volume and size requirements that are pretty easy to meet. And then of all the companies that make this screen, it sorts them by yield and only keeps the top half. And it shows that right here. That's why SCHD is able to have a relatively high dividend yield compared to some of its peers. It does discriminate on yield. And then it scores the remaining companies in that top half of the yield on free cash flow to debt, return on equity, its yield for the upcoming 12 months, and its 5-year dividend growth rate. It rack and stacks them and takes the top 100. And then it won't fall out of SCHD as long as it's still in the top 200 during the next reconstitution. With the basics out of the way, it's time to dive deeper into all these March updates for SCHD. 2024 Reconstitution. SCHD executes a reconstitution every single year in March on the third Friday, to be specific. This is just a fancy word for adding and dropping companies from the ETF. It does rebalance the ETF quarterly to adjust the weightings of the holdings, but it only adds new companies and drops old companies one time per year. This year, SCHD turned over nearly a quarter of its 100 holdings by adding 23 new companies. Let's check out the details. This is a list of the 23 stocks that were eliminated from SCHD in March of 2024 during the reconstitution. So we're not going to read all these, but one that stands out right away is Avgo, Broadcom. I actually hold this in my HODL factory, my 25 individual stocks that my best friend and I pick. I love Broadcom. So it was 5.45%. It had a run up. Avgo is performing very well, and it got well above that 4% since the last rebalance. And then Merck is another big one as well. ADP, and then you can see the list goes on, and these are sorted by weight. So these are kind of heavy hitters up here, 3M, Allstate. So you can kind of see as the list goes down, Tyson Foods. These ones are all now officially gone from SCHD. And I should point out, you can see the yield. Like Broadcom, for example, it met all of SCHD's requirements, so it made the screener. But then when it rack and stacked them by yield and got rid of the bottom half, 1.54% was in the bottom half, so Broadcom was eliminated. But here's the yield of each company that was eliminated. So the percentage it was within SCHD is here, and the yield the company pays is here. So feel free to pause the video before I move on if you want to analyze this a little further. And on the flip side, here's the stocks that were added to SCHD. The biggest of which, by percentage anyway, is Bristol Myers. You see Hershey's made it here as well. You go down the list, there's Dick's Sporting Goods. A lot of bank. Oh, right here, Sector. Yeah, a lot of financials were added to SCHD. Financials is now the heaviest sector, and it was right up there, but maybe second or third, I believe. This is a list company. We don't have the details of this article yet as far as like the yields and the percentage of SCHD, but these are the new ones that were added when those other 23 were removed. So I'd say a nice chunk of financials here. I try not to get too attached to specific companies within a passively managed ETF. But it is hard to not be bummed out when I see one of my favorite companies like Broadcom, for example, get the boot. However, the rules are what they are for a reason. I believe in the methodology that SCHD uses, and I'm glad that it strictly sticks to its screening process and its scoring system to select its companies. Keeping gut decisions from dumb humans like me out of the process is key for these low-cost passively managed ETFs to produce positive results over a long stretch of years. And you've probably heard me say this in my other videos, but I love SCHD as a nice counterbalance to some of my favorite growth ETFs. Things like DGRO and VIG, and even VYM, a higher yielding ETF, have a lot more overlap with them than SCHD does. So here's a quick spreadsheet that shows the fund overlap. Right here you have SCHD and VGT with a 3% overlap. Broadcom being removed from SCHD actually got rid of over half of its overlap from before. SCHD and QQQM only have a 6% overlap. That's what a low technology ETF does. Gives you a nice counterbalance to these tech-based growth ETFs. VIG has a 24% overlap with VGT, and VIG has a 29% overlap with QQQM. So when these big growth ETFs crash, you're going to crash a little bit as well with what's supposed to be a counterbalance holding with low overlap. And then DGRO, similar story, but a little less so, 16% with VGT and 22% with QQQM. And then you have VYM that's a little closer to SCHD. You have 11% overlap with VGT, and you have a 19% overlap with QQQM. So another great thing about SCHD. So this is one of the primary reasons I paired these two bad boys up, and the fact that they just produce results. We won't be able to see the changes from the Reconstitution unfold until we get our next dividend in June of this year. I read a lot of articles online and did some research, and I did see a common trend being that the dividend yield and the dividend safety have been increased with the changes. And most of the information I read also pointed that the dividend growth rate will likely be increased as well. I'll be honest here, I haven't put together the specific numbers myself, but I did see a really good Reddit post that was in line with all these articles that I read about the changes, and I wanted to share that now. Let's take a look. The credit for this post goes to the Reddit user EAS893. And again, I verified a lot of these numbers, not personally, but just via what I read from other articles. I can't validate that they're perfect, and I haven't done all the work, but they are in line with everything that I read when I did find those rare nuggets of data in different articles. This just summarizes things pretty well. So of all the firms that were added, they have an average yield of 3.6%. And the ones that were dropped, the 23 companies that were dropped, had an average weighted yield of 2.66%. So it should increase the yield of SCHD by a decent amount. And then out on Simply Safe dividends, 3% of the dividends from the new companies are considered unsafe, whereas the companies that left, 15% of them were considered unsafe. So the safety should have gone up a little bit. And then here he's just making the point that after dropping those 23 companies, the remaining 77 companies before the new ads had about a 3.6% yield. And with the new ads also having 3.6, we should expect to see the yield be, well, about 3.6. And then he thinks, and I haven't verified this one. This is the one that I hadn't seen around, but about a 6.5% to 7% dividend growth is what he expects to see after the Reconstitution. And again, this is accurate, as we'll take a look at this more in detail here in a minute, but it's gone up about 10% for the past decade. So we're hoping to see that trend continue in the future. We did recently receive our first dividend this year based on the old makeup of SCHD. Let's see how that shook out. 2024 Q1 Dividend. SCHD paid us a dividend of 61.1 cents per share owned on March 25th. This was 2.4% higher than the Q1 dividend last year. While this didn't give us a reason to throw a party and make poor decisions in celebration, it was at least a little bit of a bump from the year before. The dividends that will be paid in quarters 2, 3, and 4 should be higher than the ones last year based on the recent changes to the ETF. I'm hopeful to see the holy trinity of dividend ETFs, which is the dividend yield, the dividend growth rate, and the total return, all flourish in 2024. As many people here know, it's been a pretty rough go for SCHD over the last year or so, but let's not forget the fantastic dividend track record that it has when we zoom out and look at more of its history. We're back out on Seeking Alpha to check out the dividend metrics for SCHD. And as you can see, its dividend grade is an A+. It goes through a variety of topics. One is the dividend yield. It has a fairly juicy 3.37% yield. And again, this will go up to about 3.6 or so after the new companies are added. Its dividend growth rate in the trailing 12 months has only been 1.22%. So it's barely better than flat in the trailing 12. Over the past 3 years, however, the annual dividend growth rate, the dividend CAGR, compound annual growth rate, is 8.56%. Over the past 5 years, it's 11.8% per year. And over the last decade, it still sits at 10.87%. And it's been around for 12 years, and it's grown its dividend 12 years in a row. It has only ever increased its dividend payments each and every year it's existed. And those figures there did include the recent dividend payment for March 26th. And here's that 61.1 cents per share. And you can see compared to the 2023 Q1 payment, it was 59.65, and this one was 2.4% greater than that one. So not a huge improvement, but we should see these numbers start popping a little bit compared to last year with the new holdings. I think with its methodology, we're going to get back to the glory days in the years to come. Performance versus the dividend ETF peers. It's time to see how SCHD compares to the other best dividend ETFs. We'll be stacking it up against DGRO, VIG, and VYM. And all 4 of these dividend ETFs have paid their Q1 dividends in 2024. So this data is hot off the press, you guys. Let's get it. We're going to start out here on my ETF compare spreadsheet, and this one's out there available for the members of the channel, so you can go out and look at this anytime. I update it at least once a week, and it looks like the last time I updated was 3/25, and I'm on the midterm tab here, I should add. There's 3 tabs: long-term, midterm, and short-term, and that just changes the information I pull in. And I couldn't use the long-term because DGRO doesn't quite have 10 years. So I wanted to make sure to compare everything on here today. So actually what we're going to do here is filter for dividends. So these are all the dividend ETFs. Ooh, and we get a couple bonuses. We get an international dividend payer, and we get SPYD as well. These are both a little higher yield, as you can see right here. But what this spreadsheet does is it just allows us to add a snapshot, compare a variety of ETFs, pulls in assets under management, how many holdings they have, how top heavy they are. But for this one, and then of course you always have expense ratio, all these funds that we're talking about, these top 4, have razor thin expense ratios. So we won't need to dive too much into that. They're all about the same. And then right now I have everything sorted by a total rank. So this rank is just the average of the other ranks. Like it ranks all these holdings against one another on trailing 12-month dividend yield, expense ratios, 5-year dividend growth rate, the dividend CAGR, and the 5-year total return. This is how much money, including dividends and price, that it put into your pockets. So you can see SCHD has the best all-around rank, but these we could just go category by category. So with the yield, I'm just going to sort Z to A here on these as we go. These are all sortable, so you can't break them. It's a table, just so the members out there know you can kind of play around out here. But of these 4, you can see SCHD has the highest dividend by a decent amount. Well, VYM's there at 2.87, and then DGRO's in the mid to low 2s, and VIG has always been a lower yielder. It focuses on growth rate. We're going to take a look at that here in a minute in a separate table. The 5-year dividend growth rate, speak of the devil, and we're going to sort these right here. So you have SCHD as number 1 still, which is ironic because DGRO and VIG are literally made for growth. That's their only screener. It doesn't discriminate other balance sheet aspects. And SCHD has still outgrown it over the last 5 and 10 years. It's slowed down lately, as we've discussed. DGRO is right there at 10%, which is very solid. VIG, 8.5%, not too bad. And on this one, VYM falls way behind at only 5.22%. And then on the 5-year total return, ultimately, this is how much money, including price, that was put in your pockets. VIG, with that nice appreciation, is 84% to SCHD's 81 and DGRO's 78. So they're all right next to each other. And VYM, like with most of its metrics, is a step down. Frankly, VYM's not as good as these, and it's been that way for a long time, but it's a good one to throw in the mix because it's a little higher yield, so it's more like SCHD. SCHD just happens to excel at the growth rate in addition to the yield. It's quite the force on the holy trinity of dividend stats. Okay, this spreadsheet walks through some specific scenarios with individual tickers. Like I'm on the SCHD tab right now, for example. And this one's out there for the channel members as well. And I update this anytime one of the ETFs that I'm tracking pays a dividend for that quarter. I plan on adding a lot to this, including growth ones like VGT and QQQM. Right now, I just have DGRO, SCHD, VIG, VGT, and VYM. But there's a summary table here that shows you put in how many shares you have, and you could have bought it anywhere, but the point of this is just to show without dividends being reinvested, again, you only have $41.91 and you never put another penny in. At the end of 2012, these are all year-end prices. It would have cost $118,000 to buy these 4,191 shares. 11 years later, your shares are worth $321,000. No reinvestments. This is strictly the price appreciation, the total value. In addition to that, it shows how the dividends grow. So at the end of 2012, when you bought these shares, throughout 2013, you received 90 cents per share for the $41.91 that you held. So that was $3,800 of dividends. And again, without reinvesting, you never put another penny in. This is why I stress these types of investments over bonds long-term. People always argue about that secured income. It's just not how it works. But you can see this is the dividend payments year by year as we go through. 2016, 2017 is $5,600, and all the way down to $11,000 of dividends. In just 11 years, you've gone from $3,800 to $11,000 with the exact same shares. You never reinvested. So the value went here, the dividends went here, and your total return since making this investment is $280,000. People get a little caught up with this recent data, and I get it. Maybe times are changing, you never know. But with the methodology in place, I really think we'll get somewhere closer to where we used to be, at least somewhere like this at 7% per year. But the numbers really do add up when we just relax, Netflix, and chill. This is a scorecard that exclusively breaks down the dividend growth leaderboard. And this is the same spreadsheet. It summarizes up to this growth summary tab so the members can see this out there. What you can do is you can put in as of, let's say before the dividends. So as of 2023 quarter 4 dividends, this was the growth rates for each one. And you'll notice DGRO, I used the 8-year CAGR. It doesn't quite have 10 full years yet, but I wanted to include it here because it's important. It's a good ETF. So you can see before the recent updates, you would be looking at this information. But of course, we do have info for 2024. So these X lookups and sum ifs pull in the correct information. And as of the March payments that all these have now paid, whoops, I don't need to have VGT in here. So when we sort A to Z for the score here, I thought that a 1, 3, 5, and 10-year CAGR were all important. So what it is, I just summarized these up. This isn't anything official. We'll just call this the Teeples dividend tracker or something. But the score is just the sum of these. I did not include quarter over quarter. Here's where SCHD was up 2.43. That was quarter 1 payment this year compared to quarter 1 payment last year. Whereas the 1 year is the all 4 quarters versus all 4. So this is the trailing 12 months. This is just one snapshot of a quarter. So I put it here just for informational purposes. You see VYM did not beat their last year's Q1 payment. But really what matters ultimately, I think, are these ones. And you can see DGRO has the best well-rounded growth. It increased very consistently, actually, almost 10% on any stretch of time. Whereas SCHD, when we zoom out, is amazing. But lately, this is that 1.22% increase of the trailing 12 months versus the 12 months before that. So it's been a little rough for SCHD, and I hope that this reconstitution can get us back on the right dividend growth track along with the higher yield. Another thing to consider is SCHD does have the superior yield. So it grows pretty well historically, but it's been rough lately, but it's still paying you more than these other ones. It just needs to clean up its act and get these growing. Otherwise, I might be jumping ship to something like this. Final thoughts. SCHD is still my dividend ETF of choice. I love the combination of dividend yield, dividend growth rate, and total returns that it's provided historically. And we touched on it earlier. It's been a rough past year or so for SCHD, but I really do believe in its methodology long-term over the competition. I think it grabs 100 quality companies that pay sustainable dividends. I will very likely keep SCHD as my only dividend ETF within my portfolio for the remainder of 2024. I'm kind of like a robot that does a reconstitution of my portfolio once a year. I like to do my research always and stay open-minded to where I am ready to make changes to my portfolio at the beginning of each year. And of course, I'll change if something drastic happens during a year, but that's pretty rare with the passively managed ETFs that I tend to roll with. Being flexible really is important, but equally important, probably more important, is the ability to stay the course. I'm not the type that's going to add a bunch of new positions based on the new hot data from the last month or so. I zoom out, chill, and assess things on an annual basis. I appreciate you guys rolling with me till the very end of this video. I could talk about this stuff all day. I'm serious, check out one of these 2 videos if you want to hear me blab on about more of this investing stuff. There's so much to learn. Thanks for watching, and I will see you here each and every Sunday, and rarely on a Thursday. 3 goggles.